Redditors who have been born into or have joined cults, what was it like? I was born into a Christian religion informally called the 2x2s. Thought for my whole life that this was the way I should live my life and it leads to heaven. Only within the last several years have I come out of it, and looking back it seems so obvious. The moment when I realized I was lied to, however, was heartbreaking. Being raised poor. I'm talking stay-at-home mom, minimum wage dad, 2 kids poor. Jehovah's Witness was the worst. Saturday and Sunday door to door. No, you don't get to pass when it's -5 Celsius. I can still feel my 6-year-old toes burn after 2 hours in my cheap sneakers. Someone once opened the door and threw a bucket of water at us. Dad was quick. I was not. Tuesday, Thursday, and Sunday meetings. An hour and 45 minutes, and 2 hours respectively. It's not just the boredom, it's how you can rely on the boredom. You do not get to play with your toys. You do not get to talk. You do not get to do anything but sit quietly and listen as an adult fills your head with things you don't understand. They take root regardless. Or maybe because of that, you do not go to birthdays. You do not take part in celebrations. I didn't care about this specifically. It's the fact that you are considered outside by your peers. Want to talk lonely? This is it. No sex. Before marriage. 9/10 marriages in our congregation were between absolutely desperate 18-19-year-olds. The premarital sex between these people was always an accident because it was forbidden. There was no planning, so no condom. Lots of early births among newlyweds as well. Wonder why? Marriages are horrendous. When you get married so you can doink and the veil of frisky is finally pulled from your eyes, you tend to notice the other party as a person rather than a pole hole. Judging by the adultery and divorces, oh yes, there is a colossal amount of both in the organization. People usually didn't like what they saw. Having left, the closest I've come to witnessing true evil is watching direct family, flesh and blood, turn their backs when they see us in the store. This same freaking person cheated on his wife, mother of his 4 girls, 4 times, twice with other members of the organization. Once he actually planned to run off with one until she got cold feet and went to the elders. And when they finally got sick of his apologies, he suddenly came round here wanting to get all friendly. I'm not violent or aggressive, but talking about that makes me shake with rage and hatred. With love and indoctrination from South Africa, my lifelong best friend, still best friend today, was raised in a very devout Christian household. We went through a bit of an angsty teen phase of not really caring about religion, questioning everything, you know, that phase. One day, he found himself, or so he said, he'd found salvation in Christ, as he used to say, and honestly speaking, I was happy for him because he seemed happy. Didn't ask questions because I knew his parents were regular in their church attendance. As the weeks went on, he started acting very strangely, distancing himself from friends, having extremely pretentious prophecies delivered to him by God. If you could imagine Prince as an evangelical religious nut, this is as close as you're going to get. He started calling himself scripture, left his job and dressing in bright, long flowing robes with the sandals and everything as the weeks went by. Turns out that his girlfriend was involved in a North African sensationalist church. You know, the pay-to-pray types that you see on YouTube and Facebook, the ones with mass exorcisms and the like. It took forever to show him the madness he was involved in. These were people who were drinking petrol to prove their faith to their pastors on request, eating grass because God had proclaimed it to be sufficient for their sustenance. People who went to Northern Africa on missions and simply never came back. Fortunately it ended well. As soon as he broke up with his girlfriend over her seeing someone else in the church, it was almost as though his sense returned to him. So it all ended okay. Be careful out there, people. If you could imagine Prince as an evangelical religious nut, this is as close as you're going to get. Actually, Prince was a JW, a cult member, and he sometimes went door to door spreading the word as required by his cult, despite being a famous musician. My mother and father were both part of a Canadian cult called Windsong. They seemed very into nature, had a farm and got members to care for the animals. I was born as the Jesus for that cult. I was like one. So I'm not sure if they did messed up stuff. All I know is my mother developed uterus cancer, and instead of sending her to get treatment, they conceived they could cure her with herbs. As she got progressively worse, They knew she was dying, so they kick her out. My grandfather got her to a hospital, but it was too late. So frick these people. Fuck this cult. Healthcare is free, she could have got treatment. I'm so sorry that happened to you. I was born into Scientology. Joined the Sea Org at age 15. When I got out at 20, I had to learn to drive. Function normally in society. My childhood was pretty happy. Lots of friends. Fun times. But I had a lot of responsibility given to me at a young age, before the Sea Org, and moral standards were far too high to live up to. The Sea Org was a pressure cooker of abuse, stress, and lack of sleep. I was miserable most of the time, made to do hard labor when I messed up and was not allowed to leave. When I finally insisted, it took 6 months for them to let me go, and then it only happened because I threatened to kill myself. From what I've read, Sea Org is like boot camp and hard time mixed together. I was born and raised Seventh-day Adventist, and I was always confused why others called my religion a cult. It was honestly just a normal church that worshipped on Saturday. However, I finally realized why people thought it was a cult while currently attending a Seventh-day Adventist college. The people here grew up in SDA communities, went to SDA elementary and high schools, and now go to a SDA college. Some will get mad if I cook meat in the dorms or if I do my laundry on Saturday, and above all else no drinking. Most of the people here are pretty chill and not that crazy, but you can see the ones who were systematically brainwashed since childhood. They can't justify their thoughts and opinions and are shocked if somebody thinks differently to them. Because they were grown up SDA, they believe their ways and thoughts are the norm, and if you don't follow them then you're the odd and morally wrong one. Overall, I really think most of the SDA faith in my region isn't that culty, but there are a few people that are in way too deep. They all want money. That's really about it. There's no TV-like group plotting for total anarchy or a new world order. It's a business. I got out ASAP. No thank you. Same with the conspiracy and Armageddon mongers. They will fleece you with their ridiculous food supplies, newsletters and other garbage. Anon, who was mother to my cousin, who is also one of my best friends. When she was young, she met this sort of guru guy who had a group. They lived in communes. Free love and crap. The guy would sleep with whomever he wanted. The group, alongside with my aunt, moved to Spain. My aunt's parents would continue to send her money and clothes, which upon getting to her would just get used by everyone. This guy, my future uncle, had always been in love with my aunt, so he decided to go to Spain with a phony excuse to bring her back, which he did. She never spoke about it again, and I think her kids don't know. I always knew she had gone to Spain, but I assumed it was just to continue her studies. I only learned she had gone to Spain alongside with a cult and had to be basically rescued just a few months before now. Pretty dark. Dark maybe, but I think it's really heartwarming that he did that and succeeded. I was born in and raised in a church. That should be called a cult. It's literally just looking back on 16 years and cringing. It was terrible. They attempt to control your mind, your body, your home life, and your money. They make it so difficult to leave. They always say that those who leave are miserable because Satan has taken control of their lives. The truth is that so many people come crawling back because they were set up to fail. Without any connection in the real world, no education, and no self-stability, it's so hard to actually make it. The worst thing is the shunning and how it breaks apart families. Not to mention all of the heinous abuse that goes on behind closed doors. I could go on for days about it. This will more than likely get buried, but here it goes. I wasn't born into a cult, but my wife was. She was born and raised in a Dutch Reformed church that just seemed like a stuffy old conservative church to anyone on the outside. It wasn't until I met my wife and removed her from the area and church that she realized she was actually in a cult. The church required all children to attend their private Christian school that was not only outrageously expensive but lacked any sort of valuable education beyond the religious texts. My wife doesn't know any geography. Students were taught from a very young age that anyone and anything outside their church, especially Catholics, were evil. My wife's family was required to attend church twice on Sundays and at least once during the week. There were only certain stores they were allowed to shop at in the community, or they risked being tagged as supporters of Satan's agenda. Women were only allowed to speak when spoke to, and abuse of all types was rampant as many of the women couldn't speak up. As per usual, homosexuality was forbidden. Sex of any kind was gross and vile unless you were cranking out babies like a factory. You were looked down upon for dating or marrying anyone outside the church, and there was a very strict dress code. Women were required to wear dresses at all times. A good friend of my wife became pregnant and gave birth outside of marriage, and she was required to stand before the entire congregation and apologize for her bastard son. During one of the only sermons I attended while my wife and I were dating, the minister stated, "Education is a terrible thing to waste on a woman." Thankfully, my wife and her family have long since left the church. It has been an incredible experience opening my wife's eyes to the rest of the world around her. You saved your wife there, bro. Scientology, a waste of money, time and youth. Set me back years from my peers. Did not have the internet in the beginning, and it was the internet that set me free. They might sue you for saying this. I made it to the end and there are no ex-Scientologists. In case anyone was wondering, yes, it is as bad as everyone says. Being confused about what I believe. I grew up in a cult and left when I was about 15. Lost nearly all of my friends, most of which I had had for all my life because of it. I'm now unsure to believe anything because the beliefs I had that I was completely sure of that were basic to my life were complete crock. This might not sound so bad, but it comes to stuff that is even instinctual for other people because I was taught to disregard my instincts completely and now I can't pay attention to them. I wish I could just believe in something strongly, but I can't. I was raised by a rather minor one, which wasn't exactly very formative on my childhood years. Because I was ridiculously smart even as a kid, I kept getting constantly in trouble with the church because I would ask really awkward questions that poke huge holes in the faith. My grandparents would insist that I was somehow possessed by the devil, and had me stand with faith healers that would try and cure me of my high-functioning autism. Then I decided as a young child that I wanted to grow up and become a scientist. They pretty much instantly gave up all attempts at supporting me growing up. I was straight up treated like I was a Satanist when people found out I was majoring in physics. Eventually my parents gave up taking crap from our cousins and grandparents, so we all stopped going to church, and I converted to Catholicism. But every now and then I get invited to have dinner with my grandma, and every time it devolves into spending the next 15 minutes listening to her going off on mad ravings about how there's demons in everyone and how God's going to come wipe everything clean and take her to heaven. And how me and my brother will have to answer for our lack of faith. I don't get why people even need drugs. Just spend a week in a Southern Baptist church and you'll be so fricked up in the head that even real drugs don't compare. Lots of people take drugs to relax. That doesn't sound very relaxing. Possibly pseudo-cultish, but my father was heavily involved with the Navigators when he was young and single. He eventually drifted away but kept most of the beliefs, which he enforced on my brothers and I growing up. To be honest, I'm not always 100% sure what's from the Navigators and what's basic Lutheran, the denomination he deemed most accurate to the Navigators' words, which so happened to be what he was raised, and what's just my father's bizarre personal quirks, but we were always one of the most conservative families by far in a given church. He still talks about them as if they set the sun and stars in the sky. I see different things online that argue back and forth on whether they are a cult or not, but I kind of feel like they are, at least a little, because I have trouble describing it to people if when it comes up, I tend to just say my family was fundamentalist and leave it at that. People understand that well enough. These days, I have very little to do with religion because of it. My father used the Navigators' words, and Luther's and the Bible's, as a weapon against me, and it's hard to come back from those kinds of wounds and feel the same way you once did. I grew up as a Jehovah's Witness. They preach about how the world is going to end any minute now. They knock down getting an education and a well-paying job because they want you to face tribulations that strengthens your faith and be dependent on them. They also enforce being homophobic, Islamophobic, and transphobic. Also, if you were once a part of the cult and decide to leave, they encourage your friends and family to shun you until you come back. For example, my mom has been shunning my aunt for 30 years because my aunt decided to leave. If you know a Jehovah's Witness, they are only talking to you to cover you because that's what they are being trained to do. This cult is manipulative and will ruin your life. Copied from previous answer. I was raised a Jehovah's Witness. So I was brainwashed from infancy that this was the true religion. If you want an idea of what the cult was like, think of 1984. No, seriously, that's not an exaggeration. The cult had no crimes, doublespeak, and a worshipful attitude of the governing body head honchos of the cult, and anything they said was automatically right unless it was thought to be wrong later on by the same governing body. Any disagreement meant re-education in the ministry of love, or shunning, which meant complete avoidance by everyone still in the cult from you, including family members who were still in. I got out when I said enough is enough. I still haven't talked to my mother in 10 years. I was born into the Jehovah's Witnesses. I didn't know it was a cult at the time. I knew that I wasn't supposed to really be friends with non-members, and it kind of sucked not having birthday parties or celebrating Easter, Halloween or Christmas. They also discourage you from going to college or marrying outside the faith. Around the age of 14, I began exploring other religions. I still didn't think they were a cult. I just thought they weren't the right one for me. Unfortunately, I ended up falling for the sales pitch of the Mormons, so I joined up with them at 18. It's actually a pretty nice deal, until you learn about all the weird stuff. And there's a lot of weird stuff. Mormon stuff you probably know about. Priesthood authority passed down from Joseph Smith. Book of Mormon allegedly tells about the coming of Jesus and prophets in America. Polygamy, word of wisdom, restricts you from drinking coffee and tea, smoking tobacco, alcohol, etc. Also, have to be a full tithe payer. In a recent conference, they reiterated that if you have to choose between feeding your family and paying tithing, you pay your tithing, in order to go to the temple and perform saving ordinances for yourself and then later for dead ancestors, or complete strangers. Took me another 20 years to realize that both of them are cults. Hey, does anyone know a recruiter for Scientology? I have a friend currently involved in one. She had everything right until she joined, about to graduate, had a job lined up in her field that was a dream job she's talked about since I have known her. English teacher. She joined and all of a sudden didn't want to, and moved into a house with 6 other people. I think this might have been due to her college life not being great, not many friends. So once she made them, she didn't want to let go. How do you tell someone they're ruining their life doing something like that? If this is the group I think it is, tread lightly. You may be accused of being under the influence of devil spirit possession. That's not a table you turn unless you want to hear heck, fire and brimstone. If she takes the foundational class, you can then be marked and avoided. I have family involved in such a group. It's ugly. When my mom was 4, she was dropped off at a Hare Krishna temple with her younger brother. It was the 70s, so I don't believe anybody understood the risks of antidepressants. Her mom was so fricked up on them that she could no longer care for the two. Keep in mind that her brother was just 2 years old and had not a clue what was going on. From what I recall, my mom and her brother had to work in the temple every day. They had to move heavy things around, chant that Hare Krishna bulls, etc. And one fricked up day, while my mom was at a different side of the temple, her brother was killed. He was so tired from the labor he just couldn't move anymore. Staff of the temple came up to him and literally beat him to death for not working. These peace-promoting sacks of crap murdered my mom's only sibling because he was too young to do the hard work they gave him. She was eventually removed from the temple, and to this day she hates her mom with a passion. If it weren't for that lady, her brother still wouldn't have been around. He would have gone to school like her, graduated like her, gone to college like her, and maybe even raise a family like her. But thanks to her mom and the Hare Krishna, that never happened. I joined the Hare Krishnas as a teenager in the 90s. They worked people down to the bone. I can definitely see how that would have happened. I've been out for years, but it still pisses me off when I see people talk about how harmless they are or how good their restaurants are. I was born into an independent fundamental Baptist church-going family. Now, I don't consider all Baptist churches to be cults, but I do consider IFBC to be a cult. They would make their own additions to the Bible and twist things to fit their narrative. Women weren't allowed to wear pants. Misogyny ran rampant in all the sermons, and kind of music that wasn't a hymn was considered to be straight from Satan. Stupid crap like that. They even talked so bad about public education that they convinced everybody to put their kids in the private, unaccredited, mind you, church school. From there they taught us and required us to go out and recruit new churchgoers under the disguise of soul winning. We had quotas of how many people we were supposed to convert, and if we didn't meet the quotas we would be ridiculed at school. Looking back on everything now, as a 30-year-old man, I am surprised I didn't catch on to what was going on in my teenage years. They convinced me that it was my calling to go to a Christian college, unaccredited again, to further my education and to start my own church. It was in that college that I really started to open my eyes and see everything for what it was. Stupid little things got under my skin that I started to look for a way out. Things like women weren't allowed to go off campus without a staff member, hardcore homophobic and misogynistic messages in required chapel, every day, and church, and ever harsher quotas for recruitment. I ended up getting kicked out of the college because I started to question things and became a backslider, term they used for my rebellion. It wasn't until after I got kicked out and moved back to my hometown that a lot of real shady stuff came up about the college and a lot of the churches associated with it. Multiple pastors, including the chancellor of the college and pastor of the largest IFBC church, ended up being found guilty of statutory rape, many on multiple accounts. Many more staff members and of the college and churches were accused of child abuse, verbal and physical, of their own children and children they fostered. Sad thing is, most of them are still out there and their kids are too scared and sheltered that nothing will ever be said or fixed. I was born into a doomsday kind of cult in the 80s. It formed on Long Island back in the 60s. Growing up, I was taught that we were God's chosen people and it was our job to rule his kingdom on earth. After the end days came, most my life has been spent preparing for the apocalypse in some way. I personally always saw through the teachings from our leader, for lack of a better word. When your whole family, and most your friends are believers, it's a struggle. Through me teens and 20s, I struggled with the idea that maybe I'm wrong and they are right. I also struggled with how I could leave the cult and still keep my family and friends. I was lucky, in that, most my gamely had a falling out with the cult. This gave us all a chance to distance ourselves together. I did lose most my friends from the cult. People who were really good people regardless of their affiliations. It's been 5 years since I left. I'm better off in every way possible. Growing up thinking the world will end before you're 30, you don't really plan for the future. Well, you do, only it's a fictional future. It was difficult to adjust to the thought of working towards real life goals without the feeling of why work so hard if this is all going to end soon anyway, or should I take this opportunity? Does it go along with XXXXS teaching? My parents joined one when I was 4 or 5. I left when I was 21. They practice shunning, so I haven't really spoken to anyone in the cult since I left. I've done a news interview about it. Being raised in a cult is akin to being blindfolded and spun around several times before attempting to pin the tail on the donkey. I was totally lost. When I left, I had to basically start completely over at trying to figure the world out. The things that are basic tenets of everyday life in the cult have approximately zero bearing on how to life in the rest of the world. They do this on purpose to kids in the cult so that it's next to impossible to leave. I think it's abusive and awful, and no one really does much about them because freedom of religion. Church I was raised in held events with Jim Jones, so let that sink in. They continue to mind control people out of Jeffersonville, Indiana. Christ gospel, I can't wait until you get your comeuppance, because what goes around, really goes around. I'm not part of Heaven's Gate, but I had an email conversation with them. Turns out there are 2 members left and they still reply to emails. Born into the Mormon cult or less church, whichever term you prefer. You can learn some of the horror stories by reading through our Ex-Mormon, which is a support group for those exiting the cult. I'll highlight a few examples so you have to do less clicking. Abused and bullied from the age of 12 to the age of 15 by the same man who went on to physically attack my sister and mother. Everyone from the age of 12 onwards is asked by an old man whether or not they masturbate. This includes young girls and men who have gone on to have been sexually assaulted by said old man. Was instructed to stop taking my antidepressants because they were turning me away from the Spirit of God and would lead to my damnation. Later that week I wrote multiple suicide notes and was prepared to hang myself. Plenty more to hear about. It never occurred to me until reading this thread, but I just realized why my JW friend wasn't allowed to hang out with me in 2nd grade. I was born into the Unification Church, aka Moonies. If you don't know who they are, Google them. Basically everyone worshipped Reverend Sun Myung Moon as the living reincarnation of Jesus. I was told very specifically that my siblings and I were all born to serve him and his cause, and if I ever had sex before I was matched and blessed, I was impure and no longer fit to be part of the new pure bloodline. I could write a whole book about the crap my siblings and I went through growing up in the Unification Church. But to make a long story short, our parents essentially shielded us from the world the best they could, which caused us to become emotionally stunted. I didn't really learn a whole lot about the real world until I was an adult, and unfortunately, I'm still having to deprogram a lot of the crap my parents injected into my head. You should write a book. I would buy it so fast. If you are new to the channel, you can subscribe. I publish new videos every day. Until then, check another video. Bye for now.